And we're live. Welcome to MMA Capital. I'm going to be your host, Ben. Going to be breaking down UFC Fight Night. Rodriguez versus Waterson was supposed to be Sandhagen versus Dillashaw. Then I'm going to be breaking down UFC 262, which is going to have a title fight. The men's lightweight strap is going to be up for grabs. So, huge event next week. And yeah, let me get right into things. We had Amanda Hebos versus someone got knocked off the first fight of the night. I had Amanda Hebos beating, I forget who she was supposed to fight. But yeah, let me get right into things. First, to kick off the night, I didn't predict this fight. It was between Phil Hawes and Kyle Dawkins. We had a fight get knocked off the main cards. They brought this fight up from the prelims. I'm only going to be breaking down the fights on the main card for those of you who are new. So yeah, actually I would rarely say this, but kind of boring nights of fights for the most part. We had 3 decisions in the first 4 fights, which kind of killed the energy of the event. A lot of decision machines with some of these guys. I mean, some of these guys are barely ranked, like they're ranked like 10 through 15, or they're not even ranked, and they're just comfortable with grinding out these decisions, which can kind of drag out the night, especially when there's 5 or 6 fights on the main card, and 3 of the first 4 fights are just boring, slow decisions. But yeah, let me get right into things. I didn't predict Phil Hawes or Kyle Dawkins. Phil Hawes won this one, former D1 wrestler at Iowa State. Kind of boring fight. I mean, both guys are being active, but seemed like either guy was kind of comfortable with getting the decision. Neither guy really went for the finish. They both had opportunities to do so and didn't really go for it. It was kind of just MMA point fighting. Like I said, normally this is the first time since I've been doing these videos. This is my 6th episode where I would say pretty boring fights. I mean, just kind of long, drawn-out decisions. I was like falling asleep watching these, which is rare. 2 weekends ago, we had UFC 261, which is like one of the best events of all time. And then you have a bunch of guys who are barely even ranked, aren't even really in the title picture, just kind of point fighting out there, trying to win off volume on strikes or takedowns. And it was a long night watching these fights, which I almost would never say. But yeah, Phil Hawes kind of grinded out the decision. It was a back and forth fight, but man, kind of a long one watching it, a long 15 minutes. And then at lightweight, this fight was good. This is one of the 2 or 3 fights last night that were great. It was between Gregor Gillespie, 4-time All-American D1 wrestler, versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. Both these guys are ranked. Both these guys look good. A lot of it was kind of like these long grappling exchanges back and forth. This guy, Gregor Gillespie, looked great. I mean, I know he's not the youngest prospect. He's 34. I would consider anyone who's like top 10 and back in the division, a prospect. I don't think you're a real contender until you're in like top 5 status. But yeah, I mean, this guy Gregor Gillespie's 34, so he's not the youngest guy, considering he's not, ranked in the top 5 or 8. But he looks great. I know he didn't fight for like 2 full years because I think COVID affected him fighting all of last year, but he looked great, man. I've said in some of my previous videos, some of these former D1 wrestlers are just like the Energizer Bunny, man. They just keep coming and coming. Constant pace and pressure and volume striking and takedowns. So yeah, this guy Gregor Gillespie looks good, and I hope he gets a big fight next because he's 14-1 in MMA. I mean, he's a 4-time D1 All-American, which is like unheard of. And I mean, the guy's 34, so he even said himself he's no spring chicken. And he hadn't fought in 2 years, but man, he looked great. He's from Long Island, where I'm from. I think he trains out of like Belmore MMA, which is like right where I'm from on Long Island. And no knock on Carlos Diego Ferreira, because this guy Gregor Gillespie is for real. Like, this guy Gillespie can actually get some fights and some activity. I can see him jumping all the way up to top 5 with his style. He's got great cardio. He goes out there, those big shots. He's constantly getting takedowns, dragging guys to the mat. So this guy Gregor Gillespie's a problem, and I hope he can get some fights and get some activity under his belt because man, for a guy as good as he is, And considering he's 34, I hope he can work his way up the rankings, maybe even get a title shot. Cause he's 14-1 in MMA too, and he looked fantastic last night. So hopefully he can move things up, move up those rankings, man. Cause he's a great fighter. Next up, we had heavyweight Maurice Green versus Marcos Rodrigo de Lima. Awful fight, probably one of the worst fights I've seen in the last few months, if not like a year or two since the UFC restarted last year with COVID. Just a long decision to watch, 15 minutes. This guy, Marcos Rodrigo de Lima, was just getting takedowns and laying on Maurice Green. So the Gillespie fight I predicted correctly, with Gillespie getting a knockout, which he did. I predicted this fight Maurice Green would get a knockout, but man, this guy, Mo Green, just got taken down multiple times and couldn't get up. Couldn't even begin to get off his back, man. And this guy, I think, Greg Jackson's in his corner, who's trained like multiple world champions like GSP or John Jones. So may have just been on this guy Mo Green. Greg Jackson, like, world-class MMA coach a few years ago, was probably the consensus best MMA coach in the business. And, man, this guy, Mo Green, who he's coaching, just couldn't get up. He's kind of just accepting the bottom position, getting wailed on. This is probably the main fight I said that really slowed things down for the night. Herb Dean, who's the ref, I think sometimes has a tendency to kind of let these guys lay on each other, not be very active, not chase, really going for damage or go for subs. And, man, this was a boring fight for both guys involved. Usually, especially with heavyweight, these guys go out there and crack. You'll often see like an early knockout in heavyweight, and man, this fight was awful. Probably the worst fight of the night. Probably the worst fight I've seen in the last few weeks. Sounds like I'm being hard on these guys, but man, there's some bad fights last night. In terms of entertainment value, no disrespect to the athletes themselves, but man, just a bunch of decision machines last night. Next up, we had welterweight. I predicted Jeff Neal to get a knockout. He didn't against Neal Magny. Another one I'm not going to spend too much time on. Just kind of a slow, boring fight. Neal Magny I talked about last week. He's a great fighter. He's got a great record. I think he's on pace to maybe have the most wins in men's welterweight history in the UFC, but man, I can see why people don't talk about him a ton, man. He's a boring fighter, man. It's kind of off volume, getting some takedowns, clinch control. Way too much cage wrestling last night against the cage in a lot of these fights. Way too much guys just kind of laying on each other. Just super boring fights, in my opinion. Neal Magny, I mean, he's a great fighter, but I don't think he'll ever get the respect he's due if he's just in these boring, drawn-out fights, you know? A lot of these fights last night, I mean, neither guy was just hurt too bad. You know, you'd see a guy get stunned, and then they would clinch and kind of cage wrestle, and man, these are probably one of the worst events in the last few months. Even the commentators sounded like they were falling asleep last night, and I know damn well I was. Like I said, man, I'm looking right now on my MacBook. Yeah, the first 4 fights, dude, on the main card. I mean, 3 decisions, and it's not like any of those fights were real wars back and forth, man. They were real snooze fests, unfortunately. I don't know what happened the last few months. These fights have been great, but last night, shit. Some real boring ones. And then the co-main welterweight. Unfortunately, I didn't get this one correct either. I hit 2 of 4 this week. I think if Amanda Hebos fought against Angela Hill, that's who she was supposed to fight. I think I would have predicted that one correctly. But in this one going in, I thought Donald Cerrone was going to win. Cowboy has like pretty much every damn record in the UFC you could want versus Alex Morono. Unfortunately, Donald Cerrone knocked out in round 1, man. I think he's done. For those who are unfamiliar with it, I think he has the most fights in UFC history, most finishes, most bonuses. I mean, guy's a legend of the sport. Probably one of the better fighters to never win a belt. He's definitely up there. Just a guy who can never win the big fights a few times in a row to get that title shot and win the belt. But man, he looks he looks done, man. For a guy who has the most fights and most finishes in UFC history, man, he's looked slow his last 2 fights. Really slow and sluggish, slow movement. I mean, he's fighting with his hands down. He's not moving his head at all. He's got no chin left. I touched upon this in my last video. Unfortunately, when you're in as many fights as this guy, Cowboy Cerrone's been in, your chin starts to fade. I mean, he's not getting knocked out in one punch. He's not getting completely embarrassed out there, but it seems like when Cerrone gets stunned for the first time, he can't clear the cobwebs and recover. We saw it last night. This guy Morono hit him with a few big shots. He was wobbled, managed to survive for a little bit longer, but I mean, this guy's Cowboy's not getting killed in there, but like he's at the point now where, you know, you would have to put him against a real scrub for him to get a win. He was initially supposed to fight Diego Sanchez, another fighter who's completely washed, who just got cut. Fortunately for Cowboy, man, unless you're putting him against a guy who's like, it's his UFC debut and it's real young, or someone who's just a scrub, he's not going to get any more UFC wins, man. These athletes are too good. The roster's so young nowadays, too. I mean, Dana White's really been cutting a lot of legends of the sport, like Yoel Romero, Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos. I mean, the UFC's philosophy is future world champion or top contender, someone who's been able to fight for the belt multiple times, which it looks like this guy, Alex Moreno, could do. I mean, Alex Moreno, kind of a smaller name for sure, but hey, this is a big fight for him, big win against a big name. This is kind of how it works, unfortunately. You're a lot of these guys, when they're on their way out, they test these prospects like Alex Moreno, right? And that's it. This guy, Alex Moreno, I know he's like a credentialed kickboxer and has some real credentials in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so this guy might be a problem at welterweight. I mean, he made it look easy out there. Again, I think Donald Cerrone's done, man. I think he's like 0-5 or 0-6 in his last few fights. I think if you're Dana White or the UFC, you got to step in here and kind of tell the guy to hang it up or cut him. Maybe go let him fight in like Bellator or PFL, you know, or one or something. Although one championship looks like they have some pretty fucking legit fighters, and so does Bellator. But I don't know, man. I just don't think, like, Donald Cerrone looks slow. He looks sluggish. He's not using any kind of like striking defense. Like, his hands are here, and he doesn't move his head at all. I mean, I don't know what positives this guy is bringing into fights anymore. I really think the UFC should cut him and move on. I mean, he'll be a Hall of Famer, but I think they had him booked against like a guy like Diego Sanchez, who's on a losing streak as well, for a reason, man. Unless, like I said, there's no real bottom guys in the UFC nowadays. It's, you know, contender or future champion. That's their philosophy, the UFC. I mean, I haven't been checking the rankings as much as I should. A lot of fresh guys in there, a lot of fresh blood in the top 15. That top 10 to 15 list is always moving for these weight classes. I mean, they're constantly bringing in new guys. So, Donald Cerrone, no disrespect to him, man, but he's done. He's cooked. When you're slow, you know, you don't look explosive or athletic in there, and you got a shitty chin, you know, your time is up. Let's be real. So, all the best to him. He's done a lot of great stuff in the UFC, been a real company guy, fighting nonstop. But like I said, if you're slow, it looks like you can't really do much damage on the feet and you got no chin and just awful striking defense for a lifelong martial artist, then time is up, man. That's it. Time for some fresh blood. Just kind of making excuses too, like, oh, I'll go back down to lightweight. You know, this guy's been going up and down between lightweight and welterweight. It's like a 15-pound difference. I don't think that's the problem, dude. I think it's the problem that you just look slow out there. You look sluggish, you know. Guy's not really a threat in any aspect of the fight, right? So again, time to move on. You know, great career, but guy's cooked. And then this fight was great. I can see why the last fight of the night was great. I predicted this one correctly by a huge margin. I hit this one the nail on the head. Between Marina Rodriguez and Michelle Waterson. Michelle Waterson's like 18-9 in MMA now. I mean, someone has seen her fight a few times. I really don't think that she's that good, especially considering she's in strawweight women's, which like isn't the strongest division in the world. She's an attractive woman. She's marketable and stuff, but like she's, in my opinion, she's not that good of a fighter. I think she's now 1-3 in her last 4, right, which like says everything. This girl Marina Rodriguez looked great. I said last time my video, she got great striking, great like pure Muay Thai. Commentator said last night kind of reminds them of like a young Joanna Jędrzejczyk when she was on her come up, just like a tough as nails Muay Thai fighter for a woman who's going out there and doing like real damage to her opponents. In her last fight, Marina Rodriguez starched Amanda Hebas, who's like, you know, one of the up and coming marketable stars in the UFC, regardless of gender. And she went out there and starched her, and she looked great against Michelle Waterson. One thing you can't say about Michelle Waterson is that she isn't tough. She's tough to finish. Marina Rodriguez, you know, if it was against most women in the strawweight division, I think she would have gotten a finish in vicious fashion. But Waterson was able to stay alive in there. But said about in my video last week, sometimes you'll see these fighters throwing like these side kicks or spinning back kicks and spinning all these spinning attacks, man, where it's like, you know, if you're losing a fight, get back to the basics, throw some jabs, try to get a takedown. Michelle Waterson did get a takedown in the 4th round, was able to get some ground and pound in, but it's weird when you see these pro fighters who have a lot of experience. It's like they're clearly losing a fight and they're throwing all these fancy strikes. You know, Michelle Waterson is like a legit black belt in karate, so she's got all these side kicks that look cool, but one, they don't do a lot of damage, and it looks like it takes a ton of energy to be throwing these side kicks to the head and stuff instead of just using your hands to stick and move, right? So, hit this one in the head. It was a really fun fight to watch back and forth. Michelle Waterson had her moments, but I mean, she might be in Bellator in a fight or two if you're 1-3. I don't think Michelle Waterson's any real threat to like the strawweight strap at all, you know. No disrespect, but I just don't think she's that good. Since she's been in the UFC, she's like win 2, lose 2 in a division that's really not that stacked, right? It's not men's lightweight or welterweight where you got killers everywhere, right? But Marina Rodriguez, they're actually talking about setting up a fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, which would be a great fight. Former strawweight queen, probably the most accomplished women's strawweight fighter in UFC history. That would be a great fight because they have similar styles. They're tough as nails, and they can do real damage in there. They're not going out trying to be a decision machine like some of these other guys were last night. Like Marina Rodriguez is like a real killer in there. Does real damage to pretty much every part of the body. So she's legit. And I'll definitely keep my eyes on her because she's fun to watch. She goes in there with bad intentions. I mean, she's got a lot of power in her hands and kicks. So yeah, that's it for the fights last night. I hit on 2 and 4, which isn't great. Probably like one of my least favorite events in the last few months, man. Just too many guys comfortable to kind of grind out decisions and just be decision machines, man. A lot of inactivity on the ground. A lot of guys just going for volume strikes without really trying to do damage and get a knockout, you know? It's just boring as hell. When there's 5 or 6 fights on the main card and, you know, the first 3 or 4 are, like, long, drawn-out decisions. Felt like I was watching this event for 5 or 6 hours last night, and some of those fights were that bad. So, yeah, hopefully we don't have another event like that for a while. Hopefully we get some more finishes. Let me take a look. Oh, yeah, I'm even looking at the prelims, and 2 of the 3 prelims were decisions, man. So, man, put some guys in the cards and get some finishes, man, or at least go out there, like, trying to get the win, not just content to land more strikes and just get a decision. It's just boring to watch. So, yeah, let me go into next week's event. These fights should be great. Looks like we have 5 fights on the main card. That's great. 6 is a little long sometimes, especially if you have some decisions. So, yeah, lightweight strap is up between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler Michael Chandler, former Bellator champ. I think he was a former multiple-time Bellator champ. He got the belt, lost it, and won it back. So real legit guy. Charles Oliveira, most submissions in UFC history, and I think he's tied with Donald Cerrone for most finishes in UFC history. So that should be an exciting lightweight fight. There's probably going to be a finish in that title fight. So yeah, let me get right into things. I'm trying to keep the length of these videos down so they're a little bit more digestible. So first we have featherweight between Shane Burgos and Edson Barboza. Edson Barboza has some of the best kicks, especially leg kicks in MMA. I'm going to go Barboza finish. Next we have women's flyweight, Caitlyn Chuchagan versus Vivian Arujo. I'm going to go Chuchagan in this fight. She's actually a former title challenger for the lightweight strap. And I think she wants to get back on the road to a title shot. I just looked up her record on SureDog before I made the video. This girl, Caitlyn Chuchagan's got some like real wins over quality opponents. So I'm going to go Chuchagan there. Next, we have like one of my personal favorite fighters in terms of skill. And like probably one of the better kept secrets in the UFC, Jack Hermansson. He's a Swedish-born Norwegian. He's fighting out of Norway now. Great ground game, like what you would call a legit black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like real wizard on the ground, got good striking, he's durable. And he's drawing Edmund Shabazian. Edmund Shabazian, long time since his last fight, man. He was 11-0 in MMA until he had his first loss against Derek Brunson. Really got smashed and took a lot of damage, so I'm glad he took his time to recover. Talked about this in some of my previous videos. Sometimes you'll see guys get knocked out and they'll get right back in there in like 3 or 4 months, which isn't the best thing for their long-term health. So I'm glad this guy Shabazian took his time after like pretty devastating loss in terms of damage taken. He ate a lot of shots in his last loss, so I'm glad he took his time. But drawing a real tough guy in Jack Hermansson, and a veteran. I think Jack Hermansson's fought in Bellator too. He's 21-6 in MMA, and man, Hermansson doesn't really have any weaknesses. That's why I said he's like one of my favorite fighters in terms of like overall skills. Like he's got wrestling, he's got really tricky jiu-jitsu on the ground, and he's got striking. So UFC or Joe Rogan says all the time, man, the UFC doesn't really build up these fighters. It's not like boxing where if you're a prospect, you'll get just tomato cans to knock down to keep that undefeated record. I think this is going to be a tough fight for Shabazian. Shabazian's like one of these younger kids who grew up training in an MMA gym, isn't like elite in one area, but he's drawn like a real pro in Hermansson, and a guy who's good all around. Like I said, the UFC doesn't really baby these guys like boxing does. Joe Rogan says it all the time on his podcast, man. Like you could be some hot prospect, some guy who's the new thing on the block, undefeated, and then you can lose 3 or 4 fights in a row, and then you could be fighting another promotion entirely, right? So, I mean, we saw it with this girl, Megan Anderson, who recently fought for the featherweight strap. She was supposed to be like a real threat, size and like athleticism-wise for Amanda Nunes. She had an embarrassing performance, probably like one of the worst performances I've ever seen in the UFC, and then got cut. Like, she went from fighting in a title fight and being like a hype prospect to really laying an egg. I don't know if I've talked about this before. This fight was a while back, but had probably the worst performance I've ever seen in the octagon. It's one thing if you did that in like a not so publicized fight, but I think the fact she did it in a title fight where she's supposed to be a threat, she immediately got cut. I don't think she's been picked up by another organization. I'm not sure if she had like an adrenaline dump before the fight. This girl, Megan Anderson, in a title fight looked like she had no martial arts experience in striking or grappling. I don't think she even threw a punch. She just looked awful. And she got cut. She went from fighting for a title to having a straight-up embarrassing performance, which other pros criticized her for. I know Sean O'Malley did. And she got cut. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to Shabazian, but I think he's drawing a pretty tough guy in Jack Hermansson. especially coming off a loss, like fighting a well-rounded guy like Hermansson's going to be tough for Shabazian. Next up, we have Tony Ferguson versus Benil Daryush. Tony Ferguson, man, it's the fight game. Pre his fight with Justin Gaethje, maybe a year ago today, well, a little bit over a year ago, he was like the boogeyman of the division. He was kind of like what Robert Whittaker is in the middleweight division, like the uncrowned champ in a division. Tony Ferguson, I think he was like a 2-time interim lightweight champion. He like defended his interim lightweight belt, which is unheard of. And yeah, was a top guy. He had one of the best winning streaks in UFC history. I think he had the best winning streak in UFC lightweight history. Unfortunately, kind of like Donald Cerrone, he's kind of cooked. He's looked worse and worse in his last few fights. I mean, he looked bad against Gaethje, took a lot of damage, and then took a lot of damage in his last fight against Charles Oliveira. So I think Tony Ferguson's done. Kind of like Donald Cerrone, just too much tread on the tires, taking too much damage. I don't like him in this fight at all against Benil Daryush, who's a guy who's younger and surging. Let's check the age. Yeah, Tony Ferguson is 37, and he's an old 37. He's been in the UFC for a while. Won one of the Ultimate Fighter shows. Benil Daryush is red hot right now. His striking is great. He's got a lot of power. He's got wrestling. He's got jiu-jitsu. So I'd like Daryush by finish, actually. I just think Tony Ferguson's done. He's cooked. He, like Donald Cerrone, I was saying earlier. Just looks slow out there, man. He's just, you can't be that much of a threat if your movement is slow, your reaction time is slow, you're getting just blasted in the face. So I like Daryush in this fight a lot. Like, I think Tony Ferguson's done, and if he loses this fight, I think he might get cut. And then for the main event, we have the lightweight title fight. This is a great fight. I know I've been excited about this fight for a few months. This is going to be an interesting matchup stylistically. Michael Chandler's coming off a big knockout win against Dan Hooker, who's a real tough guy. So I think Chandler's game plan isn't going to be that sophisticated, right? I think he's going to go out there looking for the early knockout, try to one-shot Oliveira. But Chandler's like a brick shit house for 155. I mean, he was fighting Bellator for a while, which doesn't really have PED testings, and he looked like Chandler benefited from that. No disrespect, but he definitely looks saucy with how much his muscles pop. He's got a little bit of an HGH gut. If you know anything about like performance-enhancing drugs, there's definitely the HGH gut where it looks like your stomach is a fucking turtle shell, you know? So Chandler, real brick shit house. I'm not sure how his cardio is with how much muscle he carries for 155. Chandler looks like he's a guy who's only like 5'8", but he looks like he probably walks around at 190, cuts to 155. He looked massive in his last fight. Usually when you carry that much muscle, unless you're a freak of nature, your cardio kind of empties pretty quickly, right? So I think also for these title fights, I normally go with a fighter who has more tools in his toolbox, which is definitely Charles Oliveira. Most submissions in UFC history, super tricky on the ground, can hit you with anything, anywhere on the ground. Oliveira is a young guy, and I think he's like, he's 31. He's like a third or fourth degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it shows. Most submissions in UFC history, which isn't easy to do. All the great Jiu-Jitsu guys have come through the UFC through the years. So I like Oliveira. I mean, I think Michael Chandler can win, but I think Chandler's going to be banking on that like early round, cold knockout, kind of like Conor McGregor did to Jose Aldo a few years ago in a title fight where caught him with that first punch and put him out. I think the longer the fight goes, Oliveira has the advantage in the striking and grappling. Oliveira's like very technical and sound on the feet, good striking defense, moves his head, you know. I think Oliveira too. He's been surging. He's looked great. He has a good camp. I think they're going to watch the tape of that Hooker fight and tell him, like, all right, get out of that first round. Maybe wrestle with Chandler, push against the fence, get those arms tired, get his, blood pumping. So he's not as fresh. I think if Oliveira can avoid the early round knockout, I like him possibly by submission. I mean, this guy's a real wizard. If you watch his tape, he'll hit stuff out of nowhere, midair, on the ground. He'll catch you with something, and you have to tap immediately. Because, like I said, this guy's a 3rd or 4th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's only 31, so this guy is for real on the ground. I mean, he has the most submissions ever, and that's considering you've had multiple Gracies who invented jiu-jitsu fight in the UFC, right? So, yeah, that's it. I'm hoping I'll hit on, like, how many fights are 4 or 5, or even 5 of 5. The last 2 weeks haven't been great, but sometimes when you have some of the deeper guys fighting, that will happen. UFC 261, the last pay-per-view, I hit on 4 or 5, including all 3 title fights, so hoping to get back to that accuracy. I'm kind of happy I've been keeping these videos a little more concise, so they're a little more digestible. And yeah, if you like the content, like and subscribe. If you have any feedback, leave them in the comments below. And hopefully we start getting some more views soon. Thanks for watching.